How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Ganji. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, great discussion today. We're going to talk about the shield of leadership. More importantly, the shield that frontline supervisors provide for our frontline officers, our frontline staff. And the title of this show is The Shield of Leadership, How Supervisors Absorb Stress to Protect Their Team. I did a show with Joe recently. We discussed the expected but unspoken rules that frontline does expect from the frontline supervisors. And number one was the shield, the absorbing of the unnecessary challenges, the unnecessary stress. And I was like, wow, that could be developed into a great topic. So with that said, today, my guest will be Russ, and we're going to answer 10 questions related to this topic. And these 10 questions are broken into 5 different categories. So it's pretty cool. I'm excited to have this dialogue. And guys, if you get a chance, don't forget, guys, I do have books on the market. Just going to show you real quick. Both these books are available on Amazon. So we have Inmate Manipulation Decoded and Breaking Boundaries. You can find these directly on Amazon. Links to these are in the description. And then I got 5 books already out through Blue 360 Media. We have Managing Inmate Behavior, How to Succeed in Corrections, Lessons Learned While Working in a Prison. This book, very needed right now, is Effective Report Writing for Correction Professionals. This also linked to this in the description. We have Unlocking Leadership Potential, which is Insights for Correctional Professionals, just a collection of passages. And then we have Tips for New Correctional Officers and their Supervisors. This book's actually been doing very well from what I'm being told from Blue 360 Media. And I have another book coming out shortly that will complement all this for our rookie staff, and I'm excited for that as well. All right, let me get Russ. What's up, Russ?
Hey there, Anthony. How's it going?
Russ, have you read all these books, sir?
I have contributed to all of those books.
Well, that counts, I guess.
That gets. I don't know. I can't say that I've read them through back to back, but I certainly have gone through all of them, and some of them to more degree than another. You know, I helped provide at the local jail where I work, copies of the Inmate Manipulation Decoded book. And I've also provided some of the other books to some of the jail commanders around the area that we're currently in.
And I appreciate you, sir. And Russ, do you mind introducing yourself, please?
So sure, my name is Russ Hamilton. I am a former and now retired sergeant from California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. Started my career like all the way back in the 1980s, 1989 to be exact. I have also been a senior juvenile correctional officer at a local facility here, which was the first juvenile facility built in California in many, many years. And I am also the founder of Keepers of Chaos, which is on Facebook. That's Chaos with a K. And basically, we help provide mentoring, training, fellowship, support, and everything else corrections related to any and all who are in the corrections, not just the badge wearers, but everyone, food service, teachers, medical, etc., because there is a lot of training outside of their specific fields that they really need in order to succeed and flourish in corrections.
Now, as you guys know, Russ discovers the topic when we put him on the show right now. So Russ did not know what the topic is. Russ has no idea what the questions are that are going to be asked his way. I think this would be great for me to provide some insight, ask the questions, and then maybe just a quick little feedback back and forth before we go to the next question. Remember, Russ was a frontline supervisor. He was a sergeant. So Russ understands this unique dynamic. This is not this perspective is not about all leadership. We're going to really tone in today on frontline leadership, which really is the introduction to leadership in my perspective. And when I say leadership, I know we're all leaders in our own right. Don't get me wrong, and I get that. And there will be leaders that just emerge without the title. But with that said, today's discussion is really about the people that are leaders in that frontline position, because pretty much anything here could fall into any type of leadership. But with that said, this is specifically what we would expect from our frontline professionals. And I think this is going to be a great dialogue. And Russ, you were a sergeant, correct? You retired as a sergeant?
Yes, I retired as a sergeant.
And I got to tell you, Russ, I mean, even when I became a sergeant, a few years back, to me, that was it's an initial jump, but to me, it's the most defining jump of your career, because at this point, I think, believe it or not, every jump after that is somewhat easier because you've been introduced to having that level of responsibility. But it really does start off from taking that jump from frontline to frontline supervisor. So from this case here, officer to sergeant, would you agree?
Yeah, it's one thing being an officer and acting in the capacity as an officer, and it's another thing being a sergeant, acting in the capacity as a sergeant, and being handed such massive life and death responsibility. Because you have to be constantly aware of the situations around you to look out for your staff and to keep them safe, and not just physically safe, but safe in all manner of ways. You want to keep them physically safe, obviously, but you also want to keep them professionally safe. You want to keep them mentally safe, because there is a lot of well, let's just say difficult situations that arise inside corrections that can, put a person's, mental health really, at quite a risk in a variety of different ways. And so, you're trying to do the best that you possibly can, especially for those people that fall, directly under your supervisory leadership. And so it's an awesome responsibility.
Yeah, and I chose the word shield because I figure it highlights both a protective route, but also, believe it or not, a reactive route as well. So a protective route means I'll stand in front of you. I got the shield up. I won't let anything come my way, and that is a protective route. But sometimes you got to put the shield up immediately when something's coming your way, and I think that's where it's the reactive route. And I think that was a great way to kind of showcase what our supervisors are doing every day. And it's not just in front of us, it's behind the scenes. I mean, that's what I want our frontline officers to also realize, or our frontline staff to realize, is that you may not know how many times that shield is brought out. You may only know a fraction of it if it's done probably directly in front of you, but you have no idea what's going on behind the scenes. And I always tell people, especially from the front line, but also management, I appreciate the person bringing out the shield as opposed to what the outcome may be. Because the one thing my frontline supervisor has control of is him or her bringing out the shield. That's the one thing I know they can control. They can't control how hard that shield gets hit, but then can control the fact that they're bringing that shield out. So again, effort over outcome. Would you agree with that, Russ?
Yeah, and I think that's a really good analogy. We stand, and by we I mean supervisors, depending on what level you're at. We stand between one side of management, administration, whatever it is, and the other side, which is immediately below us, whether that's line staff, or if you're a lieutenant, sergeants, if you're a captain, lieutenants, and so forth. And so there is that barrier, that buffer, that thing of protection, and it's all part of the chain of command, if you will.
Yes, and this brings us to our first part. So again, guys, there's 10 questions, but I got 2 questions for each part. And the first thing I got is going to be establishing the supervisor's role as a shield. So the first question I have here is, what does it mean for a supervisor to absorb stress and unnecessary challenges for their team, and why is it important? So Russ, I got a couple insights here, and then I got a power quote. So 3 insights. Supervisors act as the first line of defense against external pressures. That's why I tell people, when you take on that initial role into a supervisory position, the one thing that's going to be new to you is that responsibility of others. This is not a perk, guys. This is something that truly you must embrace before you even make that decision to jump into that frontline supervisory role. If you are not solid on that decision of willing to take responsibility for the people you lead, then you are not ready to be a supervisor. Because I'm going to tell you something right now. I get that, we grow into these positions. I get that. But there are certain potentials, certain things that you need to cultivate. And you cannot go into a supervisory role without that want, without that need to embrace that responsibility. I also have effective leaders filter out unnecessary stressors, which allow their team to stay focused, motivated, and productive. And then you got officers who feel protected by leadership are more likely to be confident, engaged, and mission-driven. Now, check out this quote, Russ. We'll love your thoughts on all this. In corrections, pressure comes from every direction, above, below, and all around. A strong supervisor stands between the chaos and their team, making sure stress doesn't become a distraction that puts lives at risk. So there's a lot there, Russ, but what's your thoughts?
So, I think that one thing when you're functioning, especially as that line level staff member, you have a lot of different things, coming at you because, you're basically, for the most part, acting primarily within a tactical role. That doesn't mean that you can't bite off other projects and see things from a strategic standpoint and implement some things, but day in and day out, you are a man or woman of action within that role. So what can happen and what tends to happen, I would even say, is that you have people above your line level supervisor that seek to go around him. Sometimes they put, edicts or memos, or they talk directly and they push things down that they want implemented, but they're not obeying the chain of command. It's kind of an end around, and they should have a central focal point for dissemination of, that information, that new policy, the new procedure, the operation that we're going to bite off for today, if we have something tactical going on. And it should all be disseminated through that line level supervisor or supervisors, depending on how big it is. And they should be the ones that are that contact point to keep the troops knowing that, they have a place that they can, both send, gripes up and both receive information down. Because otherwise what happens is then they don't know what's actually going on. They don't know if their supervisor is plugged in, and they're getting, a bunch of back and forth, and then they start engaging in what I call telephone operations, and all of these lines of communication get bastardized. And so it's really important, to see the chain of command for what it is, and to make sure that things are filtered through. And so when we talk about the shield, as you brought up here, we're that focal point where we take the brunt of all the stuff that's coming down, and then we put it into a format that's digestible for our troops, and we parcel it out, and we help them adapt, change, overcome whatever it is with regards to that new information.
Yeah, so there's a good part of that, Russ, within that power quote when it talks about distraction. I want to just go ahead and just read this quote just one more time, or at least that ending of it. It says that basically supervisors make sure that stress doesn't become a distraction that put lives at risk. Guys, I think one of your main things as a supervisor is keeping your team focused. And it's not only for the team's well-being, yes, because keeping them focused, make sure that their energy is not scattered, that they have a level of purpose in what they're doing, a level of value in what they're doing, investment, ownership, all that stuff, but also makes it safer for the agency. And our job really is, as frontline supervisors, to filter out as best we could what those distractions are, or at least to make management or other external pressure, hey, this is going to be a distraction. This isn't going to work. I think the reason being is that shield really lets staff, our frontline staff know that, these are the things that are important. And sometimes that pressure that comes out, that unnecessary stress, is more about urgency or a push from someone who's got some political pull, or someone that wants to put a time frame on something. And sometimes we can't allow that to be what causes us to sacrifice the important. So having said that, that shield is a great thing to block out those distractions so staff remain focused on what's important. And usually what's important does connect to what they feel is also important. So I thought that was definitely a good question to answer. Okay, so Russ, I got number 2. So how does a supervisor's ability to manage stress impact officers' morale, performance, and overall team effectiveness? So I got some insight here to feed off of. I got a stressed out supervisor breeds a stressed out team. So leadership sets the emotional tone. Now think about this for a second, guys. This is a frontline leader. This is someone who you're going to have access to. This is someone that has a direct connection to that front line. So they are pretty much a reflection of, let's say, the agency, management. You know, their tone can easily impact frontline because they are the closest and most immediate to them. So that's very important, where it says leadership sets the emotional tone. Emotional tone. That frontline supervisor 100% sets that emotional tone for our frontline professionals. We also have officers are more likely to trust and respect the leader who demonstrates emotional control under pressure, and a stable work environment reduces turnover, enhances focus, and builds long-term success. And I want to mention something now. There's another thing here. I know we have a lot of turnover right now, but peer-to-peer accountability, the people that you're most next to or those frontline supervisors, they're the ones that can help out with decreasing turnover. They're the ones that have to find a way when all that stuff is happening above. How do they still maintain emotional balance? How do they translate buy-in? How do they translate purpose? And how do they reflect a love for the job? That's the key. How do they reflect a love for the job and investment towards the work that's being done, and basically translating that to the frontline professionals? So during these challenging times, that supervisor becomes that beacon of hope. And then the quote I got here, Russ, is a shift can go downhill fast in this line of work. If the supervisor loses control, so does the team. And that's when mistakes happen. What's your thoughts on that, Russ?
Just on the overall, I'll say this is that the supervisor has to be functioning, and regardless of whatever their stress level is, they should be able to function. But even if they're not stressed, they have to have a level of efficacy that they're rising to in order to be that shield, and in order to help keep everybody plugged in a way that they're able to, carry through on the shift. And so, it just goes without saying is you have to have that supervisory position filled by someone who's, actually effective at it, regardless of what their level of stress or anything else may be. Everyone in corrections is going to be under stress at all of the times that they're there. So I think it just goes to show that you just have to make sure that each person is functioning effectively, and especially though that supervisor is taking on the role that he was hired for. You're mute.
Why's my mic muted? And again, just my thoughts on how this question rolls is: how does the supervisor's ability to manage stress impact officer morale, performance, and overall team effectiveness? Just what I said. You're the closest to the front line, so they're going to feed off your energy, and you're also going to feed off theirs. But I think that's a good thing too, where if I'm a frontline supervisor, I know my people best because I'm feeling the vibe. And if I feel the vibe is not going where it needs to go, then I can go on my feeling and go back to the front line and try to see what needs to be handled. Is there any needs I have to, maybe bring up, or is there anything we could do here? Any problem here within this, within our peers that have to be addressed? And I think that's the funny thing, because a lot of frontline supervisors, they think that you could avoid conflict. So what happens is they get a little bit of negative energy and they just decide, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and leave. And that's not the case. You have to address it. So again, I think this is a great thing, because you feed off each other's energy. And I think there's a balance there, but the supervisor is the one that balances those scales. I would think so. All right. The frontline supervisor. Okay. So let's see. So now let's go to the next section, kind of identifying where stress comes from. This is definitely something we need to discuss. Hopefully there's high level management watching this as well, because everybody plays a role in this. What are the most common external pressures that frontline officers face in a correctional facility? So I got a couple insights in a power quote. Administrative demands like policy changes, overtime mandates, and procedural adjustments that also, create and add stress. Inmate behavior, including manipulation, violence, and unpredictability, makes each shift emotionally draining, because there's the stress of the moment. There's the anxiety of what to come, especially in unknown times. Anxiety, I don't know what the future holds for me. So obviously staff is more anxious than ever before. And I got public scrutiny. So you got lawsuits and leadership pressures can make officers feel unsupported if they lack strong leadership. So again, you'll see that all the time where there could be a potential for a lawsuit, and then everybody makes these immediate changes without realizing that those immediate changes are really more to feed into the public's demand as opposed to what's actually correct. And then you wind up only affecting the good that's being done. And then you got the power quote I have here, Russ, is inmates push buttons, admin pushes policies, and public pushes opinion. If a supervisor doesn't manage these pressures, they fall straight onto the backs of their officers. Now, just what I want to read that again, because this is powerful. Inmates push buttons, admin pushes policies, and the public pushes opinions. And if the supervisor doesn't manage these pressures, they fall straight onto the backs of their officers. Come on, Russ. That's a quote for a shirt right there. What's your thoughts?
The internal workings on what we do are definitely filled with stress. When we start talking about the external filters, at least from the line staff perspective, which are things that are occurring in management or administration, things that are occurring, with regards to, potentially, like you mentioned, like potential, lawsuits and things that could be, coming down the line, those things that are, exerted by politicians that push policies almost always in the wrong direction. Those are all things over which, line staff, they feel that they have no control. And so the less that they have to focus on those things, probably the better. I think that, that you just have to be able to, put your folks into the mindset of what they have to do tactically each day. And then with respect to the external pressures, it's time for, some communication, a little bit of philosophy, and just, keep them knowing that they're doing a good job in spite of those things. And, the other things that are, that can, make those external pressures worse, like mandatory overtime, for instance, those things, need to start being addressed more by management. But it's just a thing where I will tell you that line staff often feel like, that they don't have a say in anything. And that magnifies every bit of their stress, because it makes them feel like, they don't have control. And control is paramount inside a correctional setting, because we have to be able to do the things that we do safely.
Yeah, and guys, this is tough, because so when I was a frontline supervisor, there would be things that would be passed down, and there'd be things I wouldn't always agree with, but I knew I had to be aligned with. It just is what it is. I mean, I was just happy to have a seat at the table, but I also knew that there are certain things that are going to have to be passed down, and there's certain things where they're going to ask your opinion of. I get it. So there are times when, and we'll probably go over this later, but there'll be times when you can give kickback, and there are times when it's just like, okay, let me just figure out how this has to be done. I think the key here is knowing those differences. And I don't want to go too much into something we may cover later on, but with that said, the how matters. If something's being pushed down that I feel could add to stress, then my advocacy now will switch from not resistance, because I don't want to say resistance. I don't really like that word. But my advocacy is more about trying to understand why this has to be done and how I can work with my team to at least get their investment in how it needs to be done. Because the thing is, sometimes staff, they're upset because sometimes a lot of changes that come their way that they really can't connect to. They may not understand why those changes are happening. So our job as frontline supervisors is to translate that. But also maybe in the process of translating that and getting their alignment, not their agreement. I'm not looking for agreement. I'm looking for alignment. I can get their ownership through how it has to be done. I think that's a big part of what my job would be as a supervisor. So what are the most common external pressures that frontline officers face in the correctional? It's going to be the pressures, like we mentioned, the policies, the public opinion. And there will be times where there's just nothing you can do. And I don't want my staff, when I'm up at that table and I can't, there's no changes that can be done on my end. I don't want my staff to see me as a failure. So I do want my staff to know that I'm always going to give effort. I just can't control the outcome. And I would like them to understand that as well, that there are certain things that are just going to have to be, it is what it is. But in the process, the compromise here was I was allowed to get us to take level of ownership towards how it needs to be done. But when it comes to external pressure and politics, we're all victims. And then for the supervisor now to go to the front line and for the front line to continue to demand the impossible by saying, you could have done more, you could have done this, not knowing what's going on behind that table, not knowing that sometimes the shield is too heavy, and you're trying to hold it up, but you can't because they're hitting against. You got to still give the respect for the person who's trying and not just the because here, one last thing, guys, this matters, and maybe it's more for the front line. If you don't appreciate effort, the people that are sandwiched in the middle will stop trying. It's that simple. It's that simple. If you want to be totally outcome driven, and this goes to any level of management technically as well, but if you only want to be outcome driven and only appreciate outcomes that go your way, then our efforts really don't matter, because most of the time we're presenting into a whirlwind of shit that's not going to go in our way. All we're doing is trying to get something. If I got to take a foot of crap, can you at least give me an inch of just something green here, so I can figure out where I got to work from. So again, I think when it comes to this part, it's that middle ground. And it'll be great once in a while for people to ask the frontline supervisors, how are you doing? It'd be great for management to say, hey, how are you doing when you're pushing our wants? And, you feeling okay? Are you good? And then when frontline pushes their needs, hey, I know you had a lot on your shoulder. We came at you the other day. How are you feeling? Because I know you kind of squished in the middle. All right. So next question. All right. So what happens to a team when a supervisor fails to manage stress properly, and how does it affect the facility overall? So I got a couple insights in the power quote. So key insights. So unchecked stress spreads like wildfire. So it impacts morale, decision-making, and team unity. Remember, it's a reflection of energy. And I truly believe that the supervisor, the supervisor does present energy. And I think that staff could also absorb it, just like the supervisor can absorb it. But remember, because the frontline staff look towards that supervisor, they may unknowingly model that type of energy because that is their supervisor. That is the next level up. High turnover, increased complaints, and poor performance are direct results of weak leadership. And I know that sounds aggressive, but I agree. I agree with that. And when stress is dumped on officers instead of managed. So listen to this. When stress is dumped on officers instead of managed, it creates an unstable and reactive environment. Now, this is the quote, Russ. A weak supervisor turns stress into a disease that spreads through the shift. A strong one absorbs it and keeps the team focused on the mission. What's your thoughts here, Russ?
Yeah, I think like when we examine this one, there's just so much that happens, even within any given day, out there inside the facilities, that we have to be able to take a look at doing as much as we can to implement, whether it's changes or policy or operations, and be able to effectively communicate them for the for the line level in a way that they're better able to manage their stress. I think in ways, that when we talk about stress, it encompasses so much that we're not even necessarily effective in talking about it anymore. But if I were to say this, and I read it, as literally as possible here, what happens to a team when the supervisor fails to manage stress properly, and how does it affect the facility overall? Well, overall, the way it's going to be impacted is morale. And when your morale is in the shitter, everything is going to be, less effective. It's going to be less safe, and you're going to have more struggles with every single facet of everything that goes on inside the facility. So you have to be able to manage that in some fashion somehow, because otherwise it's utterly destructive.
Yeah, and guys, stress and anxiety controlled, however, is sort of part of the job. It keeps you on your toes, keeps you alert. I mean, I want a calm supervisor, but I don't want a detached supervisor. The difference is ownership. I think if you have a calm supervisor, they understand the importance of remaining cool, having that emotional control, because their decisions are going to reflect others that are in their control. Where detached supervisors, there's no ownership. Sure, they may come off as calm, but they don't care about any responsibility at the back end. So that's why they're detached. And it's like, oh, well, they look calm. They're not calm. They remove themselves from owning anything. So what they're okay with is that they don't take the responsibility of their choices, nor do they care about how their choices affect others. So for me, when it comes to this question, what happens to a team when a supervisor fails to manage stress properly, and how does it affect the facility overall? I think, to be honest with you, if you don't manage that stress properly, and we're looking at the agency from that frontline supervisory role. Remember that if I'm a frontline officer, the first person I look at before I see how the agency's going at the bigger scale is the supervisor in front of me. The supervisor in front of me is probably the most immediate reflection of the agency, is that frontline supervisor that's in front of me. And if I have a frontline supervisor that has no control, stress is getting to them as well, the first thing that I lose before I start to get stressed out and burned out is I start to lose confidence in my leadership. That's the first thing that I'm going to start losing. So now if I look at Russ, and Russ is all over the place, eventually I'm going to get burned out, because I'm going to get burned out from the stress that I'm feeding just from Russ. But before that, before I even think about getting burned out, is I just lost confidence in my leader. And once you lose confidence in your leader, that opens up the door to, literally, like Russ said, the morale, the stress, all this other stuff. Because if I can't look to Russ as someone that I can trust with confidence, then you'll see where all my energy gets displaced. Okay, so let's go to the next one. So the next section I got, Russ, section 3 out of 5, is how a supervisor shields a team. So the first question I got here, Russ, is, so we're going to shift to protection. How can a supervisor act as a buffer between their officers and unnecessary stressors without becoming overwhelmed themselves? So here's some key insight here, and then a quote. So not all stress should be absorbed. Some should be managed or deflected appropriately. And we kind of touched on that, but I would love, Russ, later on if you want to dive into that, because I think that's important. Not all stress should be absorbed. Some should be managed or deflected. A great supervisor maintains a calm, collected presence, ensuring officers don't inherit unnecessary anxiety. Because remember, you are the one directly in front of your front line. They are feeling your energy. And at a greater scale, I just want to mention again, you're a reflection of the agency at the highest level as well, because you are their most immediate person that starts that filter. Supervisors must balance protecting their team while also setting expectations that help officers adapt to challenges. And then here's the power quote. And that's important too, real quick, guys. Supervisors must balance protecting their team while also setting expectations that help officers adapt to challenges. Remember, protecting your team is not about coddling. It's not about being manipulated by the team you lead either. Sometimes, as I said, things have to happen, and this is the steps we're going to have to take. And when people say, well, remember your roots, okay, that's fine. I'll use my roots as an effort to grow into the role, but don't try to bring me backwards. Don't try to say, remember my roots, because you're trying to manipulate a favor or something that at this time doesn't work out. And now you're trying to put me into a guilt mode. And then here's the quote here, Russ. Supervisors in corrections don't just take the heat. They control it. I love that. Supervisors in corrections don't just take the heat. They control it. Absorb too much and you burn out. Deflect too much and your team gets scorched. What's your thoughts on that? That's a good one, right, Russ?
Yeah, the way that I think about this is, pretty simple in terms, if you will just, understand, what delegation means. And so, there is, some stress that we have to absorb. There's some that we have to, deflect off of us and ignore. And there's some parts of it that we just simply have to delegate to other people. You've got a team, you know what their talents are, and you should be able to, make those bite-sized chunks, and start, putting those tasks out to those team members, especially, the ones that, excel in specific areas or that are subject matter experts. And just know that, it's the delegation and assignment of tasks within the framework of your team that makes that elephant eatable, as it were. I mean, I'm a big fan of that analogy, as how do you eat an elephant? And it's, one bite at a time. If you try and, think about, the overall goal or the overall achievement that you're trying to get to, it may seem too big. But when you parcel it up and you delegate things in the right way, all of that stress dissipates downwards and you're able to function more effectively.
Yes. And I'm going to tell you something with this. This is the reason why you cross into supervisory position. But when you finally get into the role, you'll realize it's more balanced than you may think. So I know I've seen a lot of frontline officers before they become supervisors saying that these are the things that they're going to do when they cross the supervisory positions, if they're running for political office. They're going to get these things done and blah, blah, blah. When technically the next step really is just more about advocating. That's all. That's all that should be expected from both sides. Management should expect that, and your front line should expect that. But when you're sitting there promising outcomes that you can't deliver, and people buy into it, sadly, because that's the other thing. You're selling lies. I think the frontline supervisory role is very much so about advocacy, and I think if it's done correctly and it's not done in an effort to always challenge leadership or always be that aggressive person where you wind up being a pawn for the front line as opposed to working for what the agency really needs. That's something that, to me, you got to be ready for. You are taking the responsibility to balance out concerns. That's your job as that immediate frontline professional. Your job is to be the person that translates wants and needs, wants and needs, wants and needs. And I think when you're standing there in the middle, that's the one responsibility that before you go into supervisor role, that's the one thing that you have to embrace. And it's not doing it aggressively either. It's just building those relationships. I would love for someone to say this would be great. Before I go into that supervisory role, you know what I'm thinking about doing? This is what I want to build, better relationships between management and frontline. And people are like, what are you, ill? We don't want that. We want someone that's aggressive. You want to hear something funny? The people that mostly solve the problems are the ones that are building relationships. It's true. You'll never hear somebody say that, though. You'll never hear like, yeah, I'm going to cross in. I'm going to try to build better relationships, because nobody really wants to hear that, because they're going to filter it through some negative judgment or stereotype. But technically, as a frontline supervisor, that's your job. You're going to start that initial bridge. You're going to do what you can to build better relationships. So at the end of the day, your team benefits. It's that simple. If you're going in aggressive and you're going in argumentative and all that other stuff, who's going to wind up dealing with the blunt of that? Your front line. So why would you not want to smooth out the road? Why would you not want to try to build relationships? Because when you build those relationships comes trust. Again, so let me see. Next question. All right. So what are some practical strategies supervisors can use to absorb stress before it trickles down to their teams? I got a couple insights here, Russ. And then the quote. So control the flow of information, what is shared, what is shared, how it's framed, and when it's delivered can shape team perception. I want to mention something on that. That's the one thing that I think I want to get out there. Guys, as frontline leadership, your job is to frame things and try to translate buy-in. So I think that's extremely important when it comes to playing that role of being that frontline supervisor. So I think how you deliver it matters. So again, when I get something that I don't agree with, but we have to go through with it, I have to be aligned. So when I go back to my staff, I'm not looking for agreement. I'm going to give them the why. I'm going to make sure that they know exactly what needs to be done, but I need them to be aligned. A lot of the times, people, supervisor in the middle will feel stressed or anxiety because they're more concerned, man, how am I going to get staff to agree with it? How am I going to get staff to agree with it? It's like, slow down. You're overwhelming yourself. It's not about agreement. It's about alignment. If you go in there trying to get them to agree, you're going to be overburdened with the impossibility of that. You're not. Your job is to fill them in with the information they need so they can connect to it at some level, so they can understand it at some level, so they can buy into its purpose, but that doesn't mean they have to agree to it. But at the end of the day, you're going to wind up overwhelming yourself, always trying to seek agreement, when at the end of the day, we're not seeking agreement. We're just seeking alignment. And I'm saying that for my for my frontline supervisors, because you're caught in the middle. So this is for you to understand how you can lift some of that stress from yourself. You want to address issues proactively before they escalate into something officers must deal with unnecessarily. And that's the SHIELD playing two functions. That's one of the other functions we mentioned. And prioritize and delegate effectively, ensuring officers focus on their core responsibilities without getting distracted by leadership noise. Now, here's the power quote, Russ, the thing we've all been waiting for. Supervisors decide whether stress is a controlled fire or a full-blown riot. The way they handle pressure determines how the shift plays out. What's your thoughts on that, Russ?
Oh, can you say that again? That doesn't.
No, it said, I like it. Supervisors decide whether stress is a controlled fire or a full-blown riot. So they control that. And the way they handle pressure determines how the shift will play out.
Okay. So I would say this is that, and it basically goes back to my same answer as before, because you mentioned, how we prioritize things, and the way that we can, disseminate, information out there. I think that, one of the things that we always want to be cognizant of is how we frame what the mission is. And I think that too often we get caught up in things, and we get unfocused from what the mission is. So identifying exactly what the mission is, what it is that we're going to do about it, and then talk with them if there's the time, and if there's a reason to do so, to identify what the pros and cons are, and not to simply hang negatives on everything that we do, because there's always going to be pros, but sometimes we do have to work at mitigating the cons with regards to those things. So I think pretty much the other things that I talked about, about being that buffer, and doing those other things in the last question, pretty much sums up this one.
Yeah, and I agree. I think what I also mentioned, introducing it during is kind of covers that answer too. I think that was good. Let's see. So the next thing I got, now this is the next section, guys. So now we're talking about the fine line between absorbing stress and enabling bad leadership. So this is basically, let me see, when absorbing stress crosses into bad leadership. So what's the question? What are the risks of the supervisor taking too much stress without the proper coping mechanism? So I got some insight on a quote. So on-check stress leads to burnout, poor decision-making, and reduced leadership effectiveness. Guys, I must want to say something as a leader too. If you start to get burned out, your decisions start to become decisions based on convenience. What's easier? Because you're tired. And unfortunately, what's easier is usually never the right decision. and then it winds up affecting not just yourself, but the people that you lead. So burnout as a supervisor is tough, and you have to catch yourself, because if you don't, your decisions could even reflect cutting corners that could ultimately cause safety concerns at a higher level. Suppressed frustrations can turn into negative leadership behaviors, short temper, disengagement, or micromanagement. And if a supervisor absorbs everything without advocating for change, officers may feel abandoned rather than protected. Quote I got here, Russ, is if a supervisor absorbs everything without filtering or fighting back when needed, they stop leading and start drowning. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the thing that I really see with regards to this one is, we're still talking about stress, and that's certainly part of it. But sometimes, regardless of what the stress is out there, the real root problem is, we're trying to manage things by crisis instead of getting out ahead of things. And I think that that's been so detrimental, and truly, and we can blame it from the we can blame that from the top down, just like when we look at what politicians are handing us, and then what we're expected to do by administration and management for either not pushing back or not trying to give us a game plan to mitigate the harm. And I think that just through that whole downward pressure, what ends up happening is we bog down, but we end up getting bogged down, and maybe there's very little that we can do about that. And I think it just goes to the fact of we need to be more proactive in the preventative realm, in the preemptive realm, than simply management by crisis all the time. And I think that that's where some things are really going to have to change, because simply thinking that we'll just make do, and we'll keep making do with less over time. There's going to be some pushback somewhere along the way, and if it's not pushback, it's just going to be we're just going to end up losing some institutions. And by losing, I mean they're gonna blow up, and then the after report is going to do nothing but assign blame. So anyway.
Yeah, and guys, I want to mention something. The when it says if supervisors absorb everything without advocating for change, officers may feel abandoned rather than proceed. Sometimes absorb is not so much absorbing the outcome. You may not be in control of the outcome, but basically it's more about what you can provide back. Sometimes as we're going through the heat and they're trying to tell me something, I just choose to I'm frustrated, but I don't, for some reason, I don't want to say anything. I just, I'm given a seat at the table to speak, but I just don't want to. I start to suppress my feelings, and, I start holding it in. And now I'm really not doing any good, because again, I'm brought to the table, I'm able to speak, and I decide not to. And now the funny thing is I hold it all in. I go back to the table and of my people now, and I'm just frustrated, but then I never even made the effort to speak. So now I'm holding everything in because I'm frustrated, I'm burned out, and I'm not translating the concerns either way, because I think when you go into that table setting, when you go to speak your concerns, it's not about winning or losing. You got to remove that mindset. It's about just trying to get things aligned and moving forward. So how many times you're going to go to the table with that mindset that when you don't get the outcome you want, you lose. You can't think that way. Your job is to present the concerns, and that's the win. If I'm at a table, and this is if I'm at a table and I'm able to present my concerns passionately, regardless of the outcome, that's the win for me that I could still translate to my people. But if I go there and it's more about the outcome, I'm going to be dealing with more losses than wins. I'm going to start suppressing how I feel, and that's not going to translate well with the people that I oversee. And eventually I'm going to explode. So I think you have to change the mindset to what you're actually looking for. I'm looking more for the effort to push something across as opposed to where it ends up, because I don't have control of where it ends up. So if I want to go that far ahead, then the problem is I'm going to go ahead and get frustrated, because at one point it's out of my control. That doesn't mean I don't push it as far as I can, But I also have to know for my own well-being when I need to let go, because if not, I'm just going to take everything as a loss. Okay, so this actually kind of gets into this next question gets into what I just said. When should a supervisor push back against higher ups instead of absorbing unnecessary stress? So some stresses should be addressed, not absorbed, especially when they negatively impact staff morale and safety. Knowing when to advocate for the team rather than just endure the pressure is key to strong leadership. Pushing back doesn't mean rebellion. It means ensuring that leadership decisions don't compromise staff's well-being. So here's the power quote on this one, Russ. Loyalty and corrections isn't about silence. It's about standing up for your team without backing down from the mission. What's your thoughts there, Russ? Now, this is good because this is also pushback with respect. So that's why I always tell people when you cross into that frontline supervisory role, this is where you want to build relationships, because I also think, again, maybe in a perfect world, whatever it is, I know a lot of people are going to say, well, management doesn't allow us to speak. Okay, I know all that. I get all that. But let's just try it this way, please. I know that when you go into these dialogues, relationships matter because that's what builds trust. That's what allows for conflict. Because if there's a trusting relationship, then we can conflict over ideas and strategies and whatnot. But this is being pushed back in a respectful manner just to get yourself heard at the table. And I think it is healthy, because if any agency looks to grow, you got to expect pushback, because this is literally how we grow, is by listening to others, especially the ones that are most effective.
So, I think that, we use, the whole, term pushback, in order to, simply say, well, hey, I did the best I could. And yeah, that's certainly part of it. But pushback is meaningless unless you can apply pressure behind it, upward. So what I always think about is get your viewpoint known, and just as importantly, get your viewpoint and the problems with whatever is going on the record, right? Because if you really want to apply pressure, if there's anybody smart in your agency at all that will recognize the fact that things are going on the record, and that things have been brought to other people's attention and they're not being addressed, that is the surest way to give actual pushback on things. It's not enough to just be vocal, because I've seen it a million times in corrections. Is people absorb that vocality coming at them and just like, well, I'm just going to do whatever I want anyway. But the instant they know that they're on the record, they become a little bit more careful about what they're doing, and they may rethink it. So I think that that's just things that we have to be cognizant of, and just don't do the pushback simply to blow off steam for yourself. It has to come in a constructive fashion. And if I'm talking to people from the top down, trying to turn things into an echo chamber is worse than not doing anything at all. So if you want to hear the things that you want to hear, and you're suppressing people's desire to speak and the way that they want to express themselves, and other ideas that you just don't simply want to deal with, you will make things categorically worse every single time.
Yeah, I like that. I like the constructive side, because you're not pushing back to be rebellious. You're pushing back to solve. You're pushing back to find better alignment. I think that's where the respectful back and forth comes in. Like if I'm looking as a frontline supervisor to know that my effort is to build relationships, then you're right, Russ, 100%. It's constructive pushback. It's an effort to maintain a line with needs and wants, as opposed to me saying, well, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to aggressively say this is what we want. Well, then you're going to eventually if that's the mindset, you're going to push back in a rebellious fashion, and the management is 100% is going to become resistant. They're going to 100% become resistant because you're pushing too aggressively. That's why, like, as I said, the background is to maintain those bridges. So the pushback is not seen as being rebellious, but rather just a constructive effort for alignment, if possible. All right. So last category, the long-term impact of leadership and self-care. So this question is more about real world scenarios. So what are some real world examples of supervisors successfully shielding their team from unnecessary pressure? So like real examples of supervisors who stood up for their staff, redirected stress, or de-escalated administrative tension. How do these supervisors earn respect and trust through their leadership choices and the impact of their decisions on officers' morale, teamwork, and shift efficiency? So what's the power quote? The best supervisors in corrections don't make the job easy. They make it manageable. That's the difference between leadership and survival. Russ, I mean, any maybe your own experience or maybe a leader that you modeled from that you thought really kind of hits these elements?
Yeah, I've personally experienced myself, and many times where I've made sure that I interceded between what was happening upstream from me and for my subordinates below me, because sometimes even it was just a matter of waiting long enough for the upstream pressure to realize that they're trying to get my people to do too much, or that they're not giving me enough resources to be able to delegate things outward. I saw, many times. I had, one supervisor, sergeant of mine, Dan McHugh, who was just, brilliant at it. He would just always, slow things down, take things off in, manageable little sections of tasks, delegate outwards, and he always did that in a manner that was consistent with the talented people that he had on the yard, specific to their talents. And he was always great at that. And I think that's one thing that I always tried to take away and try and model myself, is to be able to do those discrete chunks of tasks and prioritizing and things like that. And he was just maybe the best I'd ever seen at it.
Yeah, for me, I'm not really that. I have tons of energy, and sometimes people will mistake that as nervous energy, which it's not. It's just I have tons of energy. I'm always moving around, and I noticed when I worked at a slower facility, my pace was kind of making people a bit nervous. But I've always worked at fast-paced facilities. I'm back at one now, so but that's why I fit in that facility, because we're very fast-paced. But with that said, I truly believe here that one of the supervisors, I actually just bumped into her recently, a lieutenant of mine, always had calm energy. When they went to the scene, you would look to them, just kind of feel like some level of reassurance that we'll get through it, which also enabled me to make more decisions because I wasn't afraid. So when I had a supervisor that came on a scene, was calm, collective, and basically control their emotions, I felt that I could also be more invested, as opposed to having someone that's, all over the place. And then now I'm afraid to make a decision because there's no control. There's just no control. So I don't want to make matters worse. What's funny is I feel like when I looked at that supervisor that was more calm, I felt that my decisions would make things better because I would have the support of that calm and very involved supervisor, as opposed to someone who's all over the place, and I'm more concerned about doing something wrong. I think the one supervisor who was calm motivated me to want to get involved because I felt that she knew I could do things right. Where the other one, who was so overwhelmed, I didn't want to get involved because I feel that I would be afraid to do something wrong. So let's see. And guys, I'm going to tell you something. You could truly see the potential or the value of that supervisor through these moments of crisis and how they react. So you can get a lot of people to act calm all day, and then the moment they hit their first chaotic experience, they're all over the place. And it's like, that's who they really are. It's not during the chaos. If you want to really know who a supervisor really is, I'm sorry, it's not when it's chaotic. You want to know who a supervisor really is, they get tested through chaos, and who they become in that moment is who they really are. I don't care what anybody says. It's the truth. When you have a supervisor that's able to maintain their calm and emotional, their emotions during a scene, to me, that person may be someone that I feel is a good leader, not someone who's never been tested, because good supervisors still need to be tested. You're not a good supervisor until you've been tested. Let's see. All right, so for the last question, Russ, here's what I got. How can supervisors maintain their own mental well-being while protecting their team from unnecessary pressure? So I got some key insight. Self-care isn't a luxury. It's a leadership necessity. Peer support, emotional intelligence, and proper work-life balance are essential for longevity and leadership. And a supervisor who burns out is no good to their team, their facility, or themselves. The power quote is, you can't run a unit on an empty tank. The stronger the leader, the stronger the team. That starts with self-preservation. What's your thoughts on that, Russ?
Yeah, you'll see people who deal with the stress by denying the stress exists and denying the situations that cause the stress to exist, and they just kind of run on automatic pilot, and they hope that their unit, their little area of responsibility doesn't blow up on them day to day, and they just hope for the best. You have others that try and control every single little facet, and they're constantly stressing themselves out, and they're micromanaging outcomes, or they think they're micromanaging outcomes, and they're not doing anything actually effective. And then you have the supervisors that understand and try and get ahead of the bad things that are going to try and happen, or the bad things that are going to happen. They understand that that the outcome is not necessarily up to them, but they can have strategies and tactics in place that mitigate that. And they're out there, being proactive and preemptive, and they are making sure that they preach that to their staff, that they're training their staff, that they're observing their staff, and that they're holding both their staff accountable and the people above them accountable for whatever their input or lack thereof is. When we get to the part where we're talking about, self-care for oneself, though, is you have to be able to take a break and step back and think about what your overall health and mental well-being are being affected by. And so that you're having stress there on the job. And so, you come home and you eat 3 pints of ice cream, and smoke a pack of cigarettes, or dip a bunch of tobacco in your mouth, drink excessively, and somehow you tell yourself that is how you are dealing with stress effectively, and you're not. You really need to find ways to do things that actually bring the stress down. Meditation, breathing exercises, working out effectively, and building muscle and cardio capacity, and engaging in hobbies that you love to do, that are pro-social and not destructive in any ways. Flying drones, or taking hikes, or kayaking, or boating, or training your dog, or whatever it is, so that when you come back to those things that have higher levels of stress, you're able to deal with it more effectively, because you've done things that are good for you. And there's nothing more important, that I will say this, than doing your best to eat healthy. I mean, I'm as guilty as not doing that as anyone. Working out effectively, which is something that I more or less do all of the time. And then, paying attention to my hobbies, my wife, my dog, hiking, whatever it is. And, understanding that, I need those things for myself to keep myself centered. And so, you just have to find a way. But telling yourself and cutting corners and engaging in a bunch of stuff that's actually bringing you down is going to make what happens at work much worse.
Yeah, and I think the mindset matters too. Sometimes we put these burdens on ourselves without understanding our own limits. And it's okay for honesty and transparency with your staff. It's okay with honesty and transparency with management if there are things that you can't accomplish. It's good to let them know. It's good to be a little bit vulnerable, and it's not vulnerability in regard to your competency to do the job, but that vulnerability and just, these are the things. This is who I am, and this is what I'm doing. This is how it's affecting me, and whatnot. But if you absorb that with the idea that you have to be perfect and you have to manage the impossibilities, sometimes that's where you're going to wind up being your worst enemy. Sometimes we have this assumption that the front line is only outcome driven or management's only outcome driven. That's not the case. You just never told them, where the concerns are. So they start expecting that high level of perfection. And that's going to be bad, because now at the end of the day is if you're not managing that expectation, you're now pushing towards something that you cannot achieve. And the difference between this and being an officer is that when you have a good supervisor that wants to do the right things, the burden isn't just about them pushing it on themselves, but the burden is they feel that they need to reach that to meet that responsibility they have for others, or to meet that responsibility that they have for the agency. So it's not a selfish, motivated demand. It's rather more of a selfless demand. And then when they on themselves, then when they feel they can't meet it, they automatically assume that they're a failure. Again, in meeting the bigger picture in that effort to help others. So I want people to realize that sometimes you have to also got to help myself first. And these are the things I got to know my limits. If I don't know my limits, I'm going to be spread extremely thin and then wind up overburdening myself with unrealistic expectations just because, I feel it's within my responsibility to meet when it may not be. So, and I always tell people, you got to be inspired, which is constant. So you always have to connect to that purpose and maintain inspiration internally. And then you got to stay motivated through the challenging times, because people are like, oh, it's too challenging, but that's why you need good supervisors. So having said that, you got to know when you start to lose something, how do you gain it back? Because there are people looking at you. And if you can't figure out that path, then you may have to kind of step back a little bit. You may have to step back for your own well-being first. That's the key. It's you got to worry about yourself in the process of worrying about others. And I know this may sound crazy, but there's a balance there. There's a balance there. When you literally forget about yourself to the point that you're now not good for the team or good for the agency, then who are you helping? Hey, Russ, anything you'd like to say in closing?
Yep, guys. I'll just say this is really, it's strange. I've actually, had to attend a couple of different classes recently that were, really on the whole self-care aspect of it all. So, all things in moderation, including stress. But take that time out to really, do some things that are, important for yourself. Give yourself a break. Quit, living under the expectation that you can't indulge in some things that are pleasurable to you. It's just like we take on a whole world of stress and everything else in this job that we do. So if you really want to be able to find your center and you really want to be more effective in your job, then you have to look outward for some external things that are going to give you that burning and ongoing drive to excel at it. And so that is those things. It's just eat well, work out, do some great hobbies, enjoy your kids, enjoy your significant other, and come here and join us again soon on Tier Talk for whatever we do next.
Yeah, and I love having these type of discussions. Maybe we'll have one later on tonight to put out there. But I thought this was needed. I really enjoyed having the discussion with Joe, and I thought that we could kind of dive into that one area about absorbing the unnecessary stress. And I think this is a dialogue that goes good both ways, right? Frontline and management. So I think it has, a good scale. And I also think, obviously, if you are that supervisor, this definitely is for you. But I think it also has some stuff on the side as well for other people looking to get some knowledge, maybe just an effort to, look into themselves as well. Am I doing enough to help my supervisors? Makes sense. As always, guys, the show is Tier Talk. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify every time I post a video. Stay safe.